and this is Tom Piggott. And Tom Piggott is a longtime associate, colleague, and mastermind in the ARP world. I think he's the one who coined the ARP apostles, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, I'm really excited to introduce him to everybody. I have known Tom since I was about 8 years old, so it's been wonderful to reconnect with him. I think since 2015 when they had the event at Berkeley College. So, welcome, Tom.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here.
I know that when I saw you and Mike Brigida and Dave Fredericks, the three of you, it was heart stopping because I had these memories of you from my little girl memories, and it was so neat to see us all kind of grown up in a way, because you all were young when you were at ARP. You all were in your 20s, I think. Is that correct?
That would be correct. Yeah.
Back in
I was a school teacher, and I was very young then, so that was going to be until 24 to 25, and then I went to ARP then. So I'm 75. That's 50 years ago.
That's about right. So you were there from very, very early on. Let's backtrack a little bit. I like to usually frame the background of my guests before launching into questions and all that. So tell me a little bit about your life before ARP. You already mentioned you're a school teacher. Where are you from, and how did you get to ARP?
Okay, very simply, I was raised in New England, and in the Attleboro areas. I was educated in Lowell, but what happened prior probably molded the whole story, because my mom was a music teacher in New England for about 35 years. So my music started from her love, which was the real early stuff, like musicals, like My Fair Lady and Damn Yankees and 78 trombones, and music all weekend, every weekend. And it included keyboard players like Andre Previn, Peter Nero, whom I gigged with, by the way. I did a couple of concerts with him, and Dave Brubeck and the quartet, who I ran the lights for at that time, which was very interesting. All of this adding up to the word motivation when you meet the artists as a young person. Wow, that's a big thing. It's like somebody meeting a popular artist today and they go nuts. And I even heard musicians like Paul Desmond, who's a saxophone player for Dave Brubeck and his group, play piano as well as him. I mean, these were musicians, were not small people. And then you get submerged with Bill Evans recordings and lessons. And I did start lessons in 1954 on the piano. And then 2 years later, I started French horn, and I carried those all the way through college as a double major kind of a thing. They didn't call it that then. They had a major and a minor. Then I became a music teacher in Somerset for 3.5 years, and I left in the middle of the 4th year because I got hired at a company called ARP.
They must have just recently been ARP. They were Tonus in the very early days, 1969, 1970.
Yeah, what happened, very simple, was I left teaching because the schools, the administrations really had a fear of technology uprooting traditional music concepts that were normally taught. And the people were very nice to me. I hold no grudges, but I made the decision when I got a telephone call from one of the president at that time. I think his name was Marvin Cohen, and he had started a group of people, of teachers, to come down and try to submit what they thought a synthesizer could do in schools, and nobody showed up but me in the middle of snowstorms. So he asked me if I would come to work and try to get ready to start an education department as an educational director, write the book. Didn't know what was going to happen after that. You'll find out soon.
So literally, like, write the book, or am I going ahead a little bit?
No, the book was part of why I got hired. It was to produce, to help teachers understand it. I was using a synthesizer. I had seen the first ARP Odyssey that I had ever seen demonstrated around Brown University by a gentleman by the name of Roger Powell. And it was a crystal clear one. And I just got my adrenaline going to the point where I was committed. I was going to learn about the technology. So he was very nice to me and very helpful in starting that out. To be honest with you, it was a shock to be able to do that. So I did write the book. David was we all wrote the book. Okay, everybody contributed. I don't care who gets credit for what, where, when. It doesn't matter. We all admit to each other we all wrote the book. God, that's good. Yes, it's something.
I don't know if you can.
You might edit it, but I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
That book is right now being offered on Amazon for $1,000.
I noticed.
I mean, that shows you how powerful it is. I wish that I had kept mine. I gave it to somebody more needy not too long ago. Yeah, the original. That's the one that I always thought was Mike Bridger on the front. He says no, but that's what he looked like back at that time. And he's a perfect model for that. But yes, that was the original, and that's the one that's going for $1,000. There was a reprint with a black cover that came some years later when the first of these had gone away. It was my reason for staying with ARP and coming on as an educational ambassador to every school at every age level that I could get to.
Wow. All right. So you came on board and you wrote the book, and we're going to come back to the book in a few moments, but I want to keep the flow of the sort of beginning. So what exactly were hired, to get some clarification, as an educator to help ARP figure out what uses a synthesizer could be for a music classroom? Is that? I
think Alan and David and the other David all knew what the synthesizer could do. What they were looking for was someone who could translate it and motivate teachers to take the step into that technology. They were afraid of it. They were genuinely afraid. I sat in front of some people who were almost emotional about the possibility that a piece of technology for the time could replace what they did. My job was to diffuse that by combining information that I knew from my music training, which is historical, and make the blend, that's why Alan helped me make the transition from that to how to express the traditional concepts to teachers. The traditional concepts exhibited by the technology, and that was the link.
So the concepts meaning different types of wave shapes, wave forms, and how altering them or combining them or filtering them could create other sounds. So a student
not at all. Not at all. It was simply them getting over the fear of that instrument being able to. The teachers weren't interested in the sounds that we call electronic. They were interested in the duplications of traditional instrument sounds. And that's why they feared it. They literally feared it, all the way to some of my experiences with the union showing up. And that kind of stuff did happen. It got broken down. But so Alan's many cases said, leave the technology stuff to me. Go teach these people why this is musical. So I had to make the link.
Okay, all right, I think I'm getting it. So for instance, in that little clip that we listened to before, which I'll play for the audience at some point, they were talking about synthetic sound, but the reality is it's not synthetic sound, it's real sound. It's just made in a non-traditional way.
Absolutely right. That's right on the money. But at the same time, the portions of the synthesis that worried some of the other musicians was not the wild sounds we could make. It wasn't the sound of the wind and
Cosmic
the rain.
Wow, it was not one of them, no.
Cosmic Wow. What we had to do is help them make a transition from the things that a real instrument could sound like, and encourage them to understand that nothing would imitate the perfection of an imperfect acoustic instrument. Well, now, of course, time has changed where we've gotten so close, it's very, very difficult. But at that time, they couldn't, and that was good for me because I was able to make a stepping stone to make them feel comfortable. Now, on the side of the sound effects and the waveforms and the technology, that guy who was questioning me was taking it from the standpoint of the traditional educators and what they wanted to hear then. They didn't want to hear anything but the new stuff, the waveforms, the sound effects, the movies, and so forth.
I get it. I get it. So how did you make that bridge? How were you able to assuage someone's fear?
Most of the time, the way that I did it was to point out the perfection of an acoustical instrument from our standpoint and the imperfection of the electronics to do that. They were not perfect then. They are much more perfect and closer now. But still to this day, a live musician playing a darn good jazz saxophone is going to be real hard to match with a synthesizer, not because the sound can't be duplicated, but because the technique for executing the phraseology of the sounds, particular to the instrument, are very difficult to master.
So the physicality of a violin or of a harp or of a
Every
key- well,
yes,
key-
yes, every format, tactily, physiologically, mentally, and for some people, spiritually.
So there's an irony actually in this return to analog that has happened in the past decade, where there is this obsession, if you will, with analog instruments. Of course, some of it could be a collector's ideology, but I think that judging from the fact that vinyl records, for instance, are in big demand again and are being manufactured much more widely than they had been, in the past few decades, that there is a desire for tactile, for being able to have a physical interaction with your sound making machine, with muscle memory, with smells, if you will. To me, I smell a synthesizer. I don't know if I'm crazy, but it reminds me of my childhood. I walk into a room of electronic instruments, and that's what ARP smelled like. And so there's even a sense of smell to me that comes with the analog instruments that you can never replace with a VST.
Well, you're right. And I know that the VST issues are fairly huge. But I can tell you that when Alan was doing the engineering and watching the music, he wasn't confronted. He didn't have any issues about acoustic instruments. He loved acoustic playing and instruments, and he made his own. He built his own. He listened to concerts. He was really more interested in the exploration of some of the other things that the synthesis stuff could do. And he took me under his wing to try to find information. I came back with reports to Alan I never gave to the rest of the company. I sat with him after almost every university visit and just shared stuff that I knew would not help the bottom line. And so I'm not going to give it to the executives. I'm just going to share it with Alan. It was more spiritual than it was money. It wasn't about money then for him.
It never was.
No, I know, you're right.
It never
You're right.
was.
And he gave up a lot because of it, and I know that.
One of the most profound moments I've had with him about ARP Instruments as a company or as an achievement is when I sat down with him and I Googled him in front of him, and he started to see pages and pages of information and accolades and admiration for his achievements. And I think that he was happy to know that what he did lived on. And
Yeah, I'm humble about it. And that's one of the things that was easy for him to be. He was thrilled about it, but he was always humble about it. Really. I mean, he was genuinely that way. This is not a make-up character here. This is the real thing. And the real thing was as genuine as it got. And he he was interested more in spending time about how this could contribute to the overall music world than he was about the dollar. Bam. He said, "You guys are supposed to do that. I have to take care of the spiritual stuff." And that's
Yeah,
how he said it in my words.
yeah, yeah. No, that's very true. So, oh, I wish I heard some of those conversations you had.
I wish I could have recorded them. There was no such thing in a little recorder form. They're all big stuff.
Yeah, there is a wonderful collection of notes that he wrote after the NAMM Jam, which is something I'd love to talk about shortly. And I'm very interested in how the NAMM Jam transpired, because it seems like up to this point you were working with colleges and education, but NAMM, National Association of Music Makers, you're out there to promote and sell and to demonstrate. So it's a very different realm, maybe, I'm not sure. Tell me about NAMM Jam. How did it start? And how did that branch off from what you had been doing previously, if it did?
I'm going to guess and say that it may have started prior to me coming on board. But at the time that I came on board, Roger Powell, who was the product specialist there, I'm not sure, I think Mike was also there. I came in at the very, very end of Roger. He was kind of a clinician like me and Mike. And when we first started with the NAMM Jam, my recollection was that number one, the book was done. Number two, I've been traveling like crazy. Number three was the sales were starting to pick up very, very widely for schools. That was my job. But then all of a sudden, I went into the studio and I played a little bit of music, and Mike felt that I had enough skill to help them perform in places like universities and colleges. The AES show, very important part of the performances and the growth of art was for the Audio Engineering Society shows that we attended, and he always attended. And what happened was we started them with a lot of people, some very famous, wonderful organ players, like when we had at the last get-together. I don't want to use his name without permission. But we had Mike Bridger, we had Dave Frederick, and also I've got a pull to your brain. The drummer for the shows that we did for both the NAMM show and for AES was Cliff Posar. If you don't know, you may look that up. Okay, so we were the three.
And Don Lewis also, no? Was he?
Yes, Don Lewis was played, but not as part of our NAMM Jam. He played in conjunction with. It was really me and Dave. Dave kicked pedals on the organ, so that was the bass. And I don't want to say anything that is not correct, but let's say that Dave had to take a leave of absence for a period of time. It was due to an illness. And before coming back, we kicked off the NAMM Jams, and we didn't have Dave kicking the bass and laying down organ chords. We had Tom Piggott, Mike Brigida, and we had to find a new drummer who was doing clinics out in the Colorado area by the name of Larry Manzi. And we did the first NAMM Jam, just the three of us. We actually prepared for it at the Audio Engineering show before it, and Mike and I proved to Alan and to the rest of the company that we didn't need organs in the picture, and that was very important to Alan. Not that Dave didn't contribute a lot, but he could play the synthesizers too. He just wasn't there. So Mike and I did the sounds with just the two synthesists and the drum set by Larry, and we played the William Tell Overture to the Point of Extremes. It was unbelievable. There were people crying all over the place. You made me live to hear this. This is so good. I used to hear some amazing stories, but Alan he went around and kept saying, "You did it. You did it. It is an instrument. It is an instrument." That's what he said. The synthesizer in that time period became for NAMM a new instrument, and we communicated by being darn good musicians and earning this spot to play at the NAMM show. It was really wonderful. What an experience it was.
Yeah.
I remember being in the front of even some very famous people, famous bands like Kansas. And there were a lot of people in Kansas. They were great. And they saw us play Song for America with just us, all of the parts. And that was a little startling to them, but they embraced it. And that's how it started to change, as people started to embrace that this is new and it can contribute and be a neat instrument. So last of this is the NAMM Jam had other guests that we performed with some other artists that are often not recognized in the industry, like Emmett Chapman, who played the stick. We played music with Emmett at one or two of the NAMM Jams. He sat in. We've had a lot of that happen. Even sometimes artists that would come and just jam with us without being in the jam itself around the rehearsals. And I've got a list I can send you.
Yes, I would love that list. Yeah, the Chapman stick, one of, I live in Woodstock, so Tony Levin.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so yeah. No, I live in a very musical area, and there's a lot of 1 degree or half a degree of separation going on. So one of the beautiful things I found is that even though I don't have blood relatives, there's this amazing synthesizer music family and with all their relatives and all that have sort of reappeared in my life, and it's been really gratifying.
That is gratifying to hear. Another person that just came to mind that I ended up really having a long-term relationship beyond ARP and past was a gentleman who had another synthesizer company around the time. His name was Nyle Steiner. And Nyle Steiner, if you haven't looked it up, he was actually the inventor of a whole line of synthesizers right around the same time that ARP was working, but he's very small, from Utah. He ended up being the lead music in Apocalypse Now on the most famous instrument that he developed, which is called the EVI, or the electronic valve instrument. That was the Steiner company. That's the electronic horn that makes a trumpet that the new stuff is modeled after now. But back then he was the first one. It looked like a bug sprayer. You must look that up because he was a genuine ARP product.
I got to take more notes. Hold on a second.
Nyle Steiner, yeah. I'll tell you why. Is because he was an engineer and they did generate their own products, but he owned and used and knew very well all of the elements at ARP. Nyle, Nylesteiner. And you look up the electronic valve instrument, EVI, and you'll find the direct history to all of the current electronic wind instruments. I happen to play an EWI right now, which is an electronic wind instrument made by Akai, also with MIDI capability, which I can't wait to talk to you about that, as it would be connected to an ARP.
I did what was it? I did a report on MIDI when I was in college.
Oh, did you? Well, I wish you had had the MSL when you did that, because the modular synthesizer laboratory was, and still is today, if it was reincarnated, I'd get it into every school on the planet. It still is the building blocks. It's just like ABC blocks that of music. They're just the same as building an alphabet. It's amazing. Wow.
Yeah, I don't remember much of it. I'll be quite honest, but yeah, I was very into computers then. So.
That's nice. And I was into Mozart.
And now I'm back into Mozart. I have my father's piano, and I wouldn't say I play. I noodle every day.
I had the privilege of playing it the last time I saw him. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's fun. It's emotional sometimes, but you know what? He's laughing like heck now. He's smiling now on this. I know it. So anyway, just to end that part, we ended up, Mike and I, because the performance became so good, and it really was good. I mean, to be honest with you, he was all the harmonics, all the harmonies and the arrangements. I played the bass on my left hand and lead lines on my right, and got known for that style of playing, and even consulted with people who were ARP lovers. Remember Tennille, Tony Tennille and her husband?
Yes, Captain.
Yeah. Well, her husband, obviously, his dad was a conductor. Well, he was one of the best bass players I ever heard in my life. It is his left hand, his keyboard player. And it was his Odyssey that really ripped through some of the music from the Captain and Tennille. It was the Odyssey that was playing all the bass lines. So I was extremely motivated by him to learn how to. Yeah.
Herbie Hancock Chameleon. I think of that as an example.
Yeah, it's a great example. And another one is Stevie. I mean, so many of the songs we use with the 2600 bass sounds, he played all that stuff live.
Yeah.
And motivated me to become interested in making my skills a little better with the left hand.
Very cool. Very, very cool. So this is a far cry from being a school teacher. You're playing in NAMM Jams, and you mentioned Stevie, and I think you told me more than once that there's a wonderful story about Stevie Wonder.
I know a lot of them. I mean, my first encounter with him over the 2600 was at a social gathering at Chasen's restaurant in Hollywood, and I still have the pictures of it. Just jamming. And then there was a time when I had discovered a few patches, like the one where I can sing with 3-part harmony. I can't remember the settings yet, but I know how to get it. You sing into the ARP, and 3 of you come out in harmony way before vocoders, and I have the patch in my head somewhere. But he called about it, and I think I still have, or may have, a recorded telephone message or call from him about that. And so I flew back out there. And one of the things I did when we were teaching was to explain when the 2600 didn't have its memory or wasn't programmable as such, is how to match the slider positions with Braille, how to take just shrink them down and do them. And I shared a lot of things like that with him, but he was very, very cordial to me. And what an experience for, I'm 75 years old, and I met Michael Jackson when he was 5 in one of Stevie's recording studios. Literally, the 5 Jackson kids tackled him when he came out just before his movie Sacred Life of Plants, and I was in the studio when it happened. I didn't know. Hey, what's your name? Michael. Oh, good. Well, good luck. I'm not kidding. It was that kind of a thing. And but where Stevie was concerned, I actually continued a relationship with him through other companies and other products. So started by ARP was obviously the best foundation for that to continue.
Kurzweil, did you work at Kurzweil?
I did not. I did not work at Kurzweil. A lot of my friends did. A lot of people that I respect a lot who went to Kurzweil. No, I actually went to a smaller company after ARP and other things in the middle. I ended up going with an Italian music company, Music Technology. They had CRUMAR products. And that was the link to Bob Moog because he designed one of them. I went to his home and we helped to design this spirit thing.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting stuff there. As I always tell Michelle, I remember her because I carried her around in a baby walker, which is kind of funny. Yeah, I think that the whole generation of meeting the artists from Stevie, and it's an important thing to say here, the reason that both Mike and I, and even David Friend and Dave Frederick, we all had one thing very much in common, is that we could meet other artists and not brag about it, shut our mouths, teach them as much as we could, share, make them customers, and then walk out. And all of us, every one of us had the respect of the artists that they could call us to learn about the new technology and not be infringed upon in their gig. And I think that was an important thing that was set by Alan. Alan really set the stage for that, being very, very conservative and being humble and simply saying what they need, give them what they need, and everything else will fall in line. It was a wonderful lesson from Alan, to be honest with you.
Yeah, he was very, very humble about meeting other artists. I remember there was, I knew about it peripherally, and I was, I guess what you would call a tween when I really was becoming aware of it, 10, 11, 12. And of course, I was starstruck. Not that I met anybody, but I was, that's what my daddy did for a living. It was very odd. It really was. But
well,
it
that's
was
not
very cool.
nice.
And I realized later in life that all this music, it was such a major influence on me, but it was an influence on everybody. Nobody knew exactly what that they were hearing groundbreaking instruments till later, I think. I'm not sure. How was it received amongst your peers? How was it, you know, Deep Purple? I didn't know John Lord, Deep Purple until much later, but I'm sure you're aware of it. How was this viewed amongst other musicians your age? Just
I think
I should be more specific.
I understand what you said. My age back then, I hung around with people who had similar interests. In the school that I went to actually had an electronic music department, albeit small at the time. It was called Lowell States University of Lowell, now much more expanded. So that certainly was at least an explosion of interest. But I think what you said is right. There are a lot of times there's a big gap in our ARP history because many people did not know that the ARPs were being used in the music that they were listening to. Vangellis, like I mentioned you the other day, a friend of mine is a major composer from Greece. Somewhere I've got the picture. Nobody, it was the Chariots of Fire. I know a lot of you out there, or a lot of people who might listen to this know that. He's a conductor, one of the most famous living conductors in Greece now. Well, the thing was that when I met him, and it was much later than that, is when I found out that he had been an art nut. It was for the Synergy and the digital keyboard stuff from Bell Laboratories that I went and visited him. And that was in England with all the other artists. I don't want to get into it, a collection of people. But what was interesting was that song that got him on the map, and the most important part of that song was an ARP 2500. But see, he bought it. He wasn't an endorsee, and people didn't know that. But all you have to do, I tell you what, make it simple on yourself. Look for the song, the theme for the Chariots of Fire. You look for Vangellis, and you will find in that video, you will see it suddenly come upon him as he was working on his pianos, and then goes to the laboratory, and there's the 2500 playing the sequential motif that was part of that music. Now, take that story, run with it, and expand it by 100 times, because there are a lot of artists who did not go out and brag about anything. They bought the instrument. They didn't care about Alan Perlman or David Frent, nothing. They wanted the instrument. And they ended up doing a lot of recordings that we still are archiving now.
Yeah. We are. We certainly are. Oh, gosh. So tell me of some other highlights of your career.
I'll tell you my fun one. I mean, it comes up later in my notes, but the fun one was when we finished with Stevie Wonder at Chasen's and thought we were going home, Mike and I, and we had gotten clearance from the FBI to go and be flown to Chicago, the Museum of Science and Industry, where Mike and I entertained for the astronauts and the cosmonauts of the Soyuz, the Apollo Soyuz mission. I still have the picture of me and I think it might have been Shepard with the ARP in front of him and me demonstrating it. That's what that was for. But here's the fun part. We were in a very, very large dome at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, which is still existing and quite popular. And the acoustics were similar to a church. And one of the things we found out was that the Russian cosmonauts really liked country music. And it just happened that Mike and I knew about it, did a little country riff, 145, whatever, with country sounds, because I learned how to take the pedal on the Odyssey and bend one of the oscillators to make a pedal steel kind of an effect. It was a comical show, and there's a little guy who gets up and tap dances, okay? And the little tap dancer got shot. And the shot that Mike always did, because we always showed the sound effects, the gunshot that he did, and I know it's not apropos at this time of life, but back then it was comedy, just like any kind of comedy. And that shot was so realistic that the Russian police, the protectors of the cosmonauts, jumped over the table, knocked over the table, and almost threw Mike to the floor. And until, others calmed him down and let him explain that the synthesizers were made to do that kind of a thing. That was one of my funny moments. A little scary, funny, but true. Absolute truth.